What's going on, everyone? In today's episode, I'm going to talk about 5 simple ways to reducing the amount of plastic that you're using in your garden. Now, if you're like me, we come in contact with plastic every single day. It's sadly a way of life. And plastic is not always the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it's lightweight, it's affordable, but it can often lead to a lot of waste. And also, in many cases, it's single-use plastic. And that's plastic that cannot be recycled. It has no other life after that other than a landfill. And then there's also plastic that if you do recycle it, a lot of it ends up in the landfill because sadly, not all plastic that gets recycled ends up having a second life. So in general, I like to just reduce how much I'm using in the garden by a few of these ways we're going to talk about. And then I'm just more mindful of my impact on the overall environment, because plastic it can be very handy, it can be very utilitarian, but it can also be very damaging, right? There's a good and a bad side to plastic, and I just try to reduce it if at all possible. And so let's talk about some of those ways right now. All right, so the first way that we reduce plastic in the garden has to do with compost. Now, whenever you have a raised bed like this, you're gonna need to fill it up with something. A lot of gardeners, they turn to bagged compost or bagged soil. And when you fill up a bed like this with bagged soil, it takes a lot of bags. And that is a lot of single-use plastic, a ton of single-use plastic. Now this bed right here, if we went to our local big box store and bought just our standard 40-pound bag of bagged compost, I would imagine that this would probably take anywhere between 10 and 12 bags of compost to fill this up completely. Now, then you're also taking into consideration the bags of, let's say, sphagnum peat moss, right? The little bales of peat moss, compressed peat moss, or the bales of coco coir. Things are typically packaged in plastic. And as much as we try to avoid it, if at all possible, the best way is to buy your compost from a compost facility. Now, we went to a compost facility not too far from here. It's a municipal compost facility where they actually take yard waste from around our town and they compost it. And they sell it back at a discounted rate. Very affordable. And it allowed us to fill up this raised bed for about $1, $2 worth of compost, because it's $15 a yard. And so for maybe $3 or $4, we filled up this raised bed here. Not only did we save money in the long run, we ended up with a better quality product, and we didn't have any single-use plastic to fill this bed up. You could also just generate your own compost. Take your food scraps, yard waste. We've done lots of videos on composting. In fact, we just did one on composting not too long ago. Make your own compost, and that is also going to reduce how much single-use plastic you use in the garden. The second way we reduce plastic in the garden, and this is probably the largest way, has to do with our containers. Now, these seed starting containers are what we use to start our seedlings earlier in the season. When we have our garden not ready to be planted out yet, indoors, we start in these. And these are all plastic. Now, there's a lot of different options for you if you're trying to reduce plastic, but I think for me, and this just comes down to my preference, the most sensible one is to buy really high quality, reusable plastic seed starting trays. We'll talk more about that in a second. Now, there are other options. You can buy terracotta. There are lots of companies that sell terracotta seed starting materials. You can also do what we actually do for our really quick growing crops, which is called soil blocking. We have a soil blocker, actually, full disclosure, we sell a soil blocker. We love using a soil blocker. That is basically turning blocks of compressed soil into a pot. And we have those over at MIgardener.com. You can check them out. They are amazing. But we use those for things like our lettuce, our radishes, beets, our fast growing crops that we can basically make and throw out into the garden within 2 or 3 weeks. That's awesome. We use those a lot. So they're soil blockers. There also are people that will just say, well, I simply reuse things like yogurt containers or repurpose, right? And that's fine too. I am a huge advocate of that. If you're giving new life to things that would otherwise be thrown out, like a Solo cup or something like that, absolutely, 100% fine. Make sure you drill some holes in the bottom, obviously, but that's great. That's awesome and totally viable. For me, when I'm starting the amount of plants that we're starting, and some of those plants that we're starting early are things like tomatoes and peppers, which can be a little trickier in soil blocks, we turn to these. Now, again, full transparency, we do sell these over at MIgardener.com. We partnered with Bootstrap Farmer They make, in my opinion, one of the highest quality, best seed starting materials you're going to find anywhere. And they're made here in the United States. The best thing about them is that these will last so much longer than these right here. Now, I had these for literally 1 year, and they're already starting to crack on the sides. I didn't pre-crack it, so I mean, you know me, it's not theatrics. Literally, just from squeezing the sides to get the plant out, the flexing ended up cracking in the corners and the top, meaning that I could reuse this, but it's really broken. Like, it's over time, it just looks kind of janky and it's not going to serve its purpose. That's just wasting plastic. Buying really cheap, super lightweight stuff to start your seeds in usually is basically like single use. And yeah, you can recycle it. The problem is most of that plastic is not going to end up being recycled. A vast amount of it, a vast majority of it, in fact, just ends up back in a landfill, as many people already know. When it comes to Bootstrap Farmers products, again, this is not a sales pitch, it's just what we use, and we've converted 100% of our seed starting for our stuff like tomatoes and peppers, cucumbers, the stuff that takes a little while longer to grow that we don't put in soil blocks. We start in Bootstrap Farmer trays. And so again, you can go check them out over at MIgardener, but these things are really, really nice. They're not going to crack, they're not going to break. They're actually dishwasher safe, so you can throw them back in the dishwasher. They're awesome. And so, like I said, for me, this is probably one of the largest ways we've reduced plastic, because rather than get fresh stuff every year or every other year at most, these are gonna last us 3, 4, 5, 7 years, who knows how long, because they're made so well. All right, the third way that we reduce plastic in the garden has to do with our plant tags. Now, plant tags, I am an offender of using plastic plant tags. I really like them, but when possible, and I can reuse something like a solo cup, we will save these. There is absolutely nothing wrong, in my opinion, to giving new life to a yogurt container, a butter container, anything like that. I will simply cut down strips just like this, and you've got yourself a plant tag. Take a nice Sharpie, or I find even better, get a UV resistant marker. You can get those, they're very cheap. UV resistant markers will not fade in the sun. And this right here, when stuck in the ground, is going to serve the exact same purpose as a plant tag. Pull it out at the end of the season, then throw it away if you want. Then recycle it if you want. Whatever you choose to do is fine. But there's also another option as well. You can make permanent plant tags. The thing with permanent plant tags, and why I turned to something like this, is because this is giving new life to something that would otherwise be wasted. But permanent plant tags, I'm always changing my garden out. Like, this is butter crunch lettuce here that we just sowed. I might not plant butter crunch lettuce. So if I make a permanent tag out of something like metal or burned wood, I have to store that plant tag. It's a lot to store, it's a lot to hold on to, for the chance that I might not grow it next year and then have to hold on to it for another year. And what happens if I don't grow it that year? Then you're just hoarding stuff, and that also, if you're a gardener, oh boy, this is I'm gonna need intervention after this. If you're a gardener, you're also probably a tad bit of a hoarder. Let's just be real. If you know, you know. So anyways, you result in holding on to a lot of stuff that you might not actually use. And so that's my only thing with making permanent plant tags, but you can totally do that as well. So I love this little solo cup idea. Definitely helps to keep the amount of plastic we're wasting and using out of the garden. The fourth way we keep plastic out of the garden has to do with the pots that we plant our stuff in for the main growing season. So we just talked about how we try to reuse plastic as it pertains to seedling containers, but now we're talking about actual growing containers. For a long time, the home and garden industry has turned to like blow molded plastic pots or plastic thermoformed pots. Basically, they take plastic, they heat it up, and they inject it into a mold. And then when it cools, they open the mold, and you got yourself a pot. Very lightweight, very inexpensive. However, really, really wasteful on plastic. As those pots begin to degrade and break down, where do they end up? They end up at the road and in the landfill. These I absolutely love. These are fabric pots. They not only have tremendous benefits with overall plant health. You can see this thing is This plant, this flower, has been growing in this pot the entire growing season, absolutely loving life. The roots have actually started to kind of grow out through the bottom a little bit because it was sitting on the ground here, but also it air prunes the roots, meaning you actually have a larger, more well-established root system that if you were to take this and transplant it in the ground, it's going to have far less transplant shock. It's going to be far more resilient to droughts and heat waves. But also, when it's growing in the container like this, it gives you the ability to move it just like a regular plastic pot. But there are so many more uses for these than the plastic pots. These break down at a far less rapid rate, and they're, in my opinion, even more lightweight, and they fold up at the end of the season and can be stored really easily. We have turned over almost exclusively, I don't know many more plastic pots that we actually have. Almost everything that we're growing in is in containers. We had all of our peppers in our greenhouse in these fabric pots. We had squash plants, we had an eggplant, we've got just tons of plants. We're throwing anything we're putting in containers, we're putting in fabric pots. You can also get a wide variety of fabric pots. Again, not a plug, this just so happens to be something we sell. Again, this is not meant to be an infomercial. We carry fabric pots, MIgardener branded fabric pots if you want to check them out. And they come from any size from a 3-gallon all the way up to like 25 or even 50-gallon pots. And so they're very versatile. My point behind saying that is that you can get a 3-gallon for something smaller for a single plant, or you can go all the way up to like a 20, 25-gallon for quite a few plants and everything in between. So they're very versatile, very lightweight, and it's a serious, serious way to keep plastic out of the garden, because I'll tell you, after a couple seasons of growing in those plastic pots, the sun breaks them down and they do end up cracking. The rims end up getting brittle, and these don't get brittle. They just don't get brittle. They might break down over time. The roots might kind of tear them up over time, but that's really the extent of their damage. So that's another really important way we keep plastic out of the garden. And the fifth and most important way we keep plastic out of the garden is actually by growing a garden. Now that seems counterintuitive. That's because whenever we can grow food ourselves, like these beautiful radishes, check this out, look at this. Look at how stunning these radishes are. We grew these. We did not have to go to the grocery store to buy these radishes. Or this lettuce, look at this lettuce. Absolutely incredible bronze guard lettuce. Beautiful, absolutely incredible lettuce. We didn't have to go to the store for this. And when you don't have to go to the store, you don't have plastic bags. And when you don't have plastic bags, you're not using plastic. This right here is why we made it the last and the fifth and final way we keep plastic out of the garden, is because if you never need plastic, you're never gonna use plastic. And this right here saves so much plastic, and nothing better in my opinion. They're so fresh, so beautiful, and so rewarding. Wow, it's amazing. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, you can check out MIgardener.com for everything we talked about and mentioned. But also, let me know ways that you reduce plastic in the comments box down below. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. See you guys. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting MIgardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care.